Okay, hello. Good morning, everyone. Nearly afternoon. Thanks for coming. It's nice to see faces as usual because after a long period of absence because of COVID and things. So talk today is about MySQL 8.0 at 4 years old. So looking at where it is and where we may be going forward. So I work at Booking.com. I guess you guys all know it. It was one of the largest e-commerce sites in travel. We're on the NASDAQ Booking Holdings. Got 28 million accommodation listings in over 200 countries. And a website that covers 43 different languages, which is often a challenge to cover so many. And then I guess the thing of interest to most people here is we run a fleet of MySQL servers, several thousand. Yeah. A lot of people yesterday were getting their character done, so this is me. I'm not sure how realistic and lifelike it is, but apparently that's how people see me. I don't think I look like that, but who knows. Anyway, I'm Simon Mudd. I live in Madrid in Spain. I'm a senior site reliability engineer. I've been working at Booking for almost 15 years. So I've seen the company grow from what was a tiny startup 15 years ago with I think 20 or 25 MySQL instances up to the sort of thousands that we see now. And it's been interesting watching that development as the infrastructure, everything just keeps growing from what was a tiny company to one that's multinational, much larger system now. The things I'll be covering, tiny word on COVID, and sometimes you have to downscale and some of the thoughts on that. Then some things about moving to MySQL 8.0. In theory that's easy, but a couple of comments related to that. Some comments on related changes to automation with handling 8.0. Some comments on the new features that 8.0 brings. So it's not what 8.0 brings compared to 5.7, but the changes within 8.0, because of course that's been a rolling upgrade setup. And previously you just got the version, you know, the things in the version that you had and nothing else. With 8.0 you get lots of incremental increases and feature changes. And then some overall thoughts on MySQL, where we're going and things like that. So first thing from our perspective at Booking.com, a lot of COVID's it's affected different people in different countries differently, obviously. But in the travel industry, as probably most of you realise, things are a little bit complicated, and that's affected us just like it affected other people. So we're a company that every year everything gets bigger, and we hope that everything gets bigger. We've grown a lot, and that's been fantastic. And we have to upscale, and we have to make sure we've got enough resources, and we have to be bigger and everything else. And in 2020, things changed a tiny bit, and we actually had to focus in the other direction, which for us was a bit unusual because you don't tend to think about those things when all you care about is making sure you've got lots of resources and lots of extra resources and everything else. So we had a bit of focus and refocus on let's not use resources we don't need, let's use resources more efficiently, let's adjust tooling, lots of different things like that, which previously we really didn't care about. If we had a few servers left over here and there, we didn't care. If we had extra resources, we didn't care because we'd use them soon. But we had to focus in completely the other direction. So that was quite complicated, but it's also good. You can't keep thinking in one direction, you have to think in both directions, and you have to cope with that. And so the end result of that is it's made us a lot more efficient. We can now scale up, scale down. We now consume resources much more efficiently than I think we did previously. And where the workflows for provisioning, deprovisioning, for changing systems and everything else is also a lot more efficient. So that's really good. And I guess the takeaway from something like this is you have to be prepared for change, and you have to adapt to it, and don't think that things will stay the same, because they never will do. So we're on-prem at the moment. We're already working on automation to basically, and we're on-prem with bare metal, but we're moving to OpenStack, so effectively VM to on-prem, with the intention of moving into the cloud, more longer term. But there's a lot of automation that we have that's running, which manages the whole workflows from beginning, spinning up new clusters and everything else, from start to finish. It all works very well. But we are on-prem, so clearly we're not in the Kubernetes world. That's obviously where we want to go, but that's a huge change within the company. The application side is moving along in that direction, but from the database side, you know, if you lose your data, you need to do that much more carefully. So we're moving that direction now, and we're making a lot of progress in that, and that's obviously will make us much more efficient than we are now. But yeah, it's something you have to take very, very carefully. Yeah, so as I say, so basically the thing here is adapt to change, you know, and the good thing, I guess, this year is we can say that things look much more positive than they did previously. So we're back to worrying about scaling up again, which I think is the best place to worry about, and that's nice, especially after so much time. So then. About moving everything to MySQL 8.0. So we've been running 8.0 since it was like DMR versions, so over 4 years ago. So the GA version came out 4 years ago, and we were running on DMR versions like 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 versions prior to that. You know, some versions in production and things, testing them out, checking that they work, giving feedback to Oracle and things on this doesn't quite work the way we like, and so on. And most of our, you know, and since the GA versions of MySQL, we've been running most of our fleet on 8.0, you know, so we've been quite happy doing that. The automation runs fine. We did the upgrade to 8.0 on most systems. It was nice, really easy. But of course, it's one of these things that when you have a large fleet, moving everything to 8.0 is a bit more complicated. All these like edge cases and all these strange things that like prevent you from completing the migration. So we had a few systems which weren't migrated, and this is a little about how to complete this and how to finish it off. So, of course, for anything you do, or at least anything you do at scale, you need all the automation. You know, you just need automation. You need it everywhere, and you know that obviously depends on the flight and the number of systems that you need to upgrade. So we actually had the 5.7 to 8.0 process was in place with all our front end systems running on 8.0. That was completely a non-issue. The process was understood, it was easy, the automation was there, it was great. But automation doesn't actually solve all your problems. So that's one of the things I think a lot of people forget. You know, you can have the automation, but you know, we don't own the data and we don't own the applications. So one of the things that you think, oh, this is easy, we'll just upgrade everything to MySQL 8.0, don't tell anyone, we'll just do it, and they'll be fixed and they'll come in the next morning, it'll be fine. You can't actually do that. So there are a few different places where you can bump into this, and one of those is developers. So usually, most of the upgrade process from 5.7 to 8.0 is actually quite straightforward. You know, if you're doing reads and things, most of the reads behave the same. You know, the optimizer between 5.7 and 8.0 has some changes, so some queries may behave differently, but generally, that's not a huge change. And also, one of the things that we've always done, we've taken a while to upgrade our system, so we'd run a percentage of our leaf nodes on 8.0 while we're still running the others on 5.7 when we were doing that. So that was straightforward. But of course, when you move the master over to 8.0, then basically there's no way back. And occasionally things on the master can catch you out. So we're testing the development environment and things usually catch most things. But of course, to actually do that final check, you actually need developers to be paying attention and aware just in case anything strange might happen, which potentially could cause issues. So, and if they're busy with something else because they're busy doing new features, they're busy doing other things, then of course they may not pay as much attention to you as you would like. And so that's often sometimes you just have to get the developer buy-in. You know, the people that own the application, you have to say, you know, guys, you need to move to 8.0, it's easy, no problems, which of course generally or almost always is the case, and just get them on board with you. The other thing which in our case was interesting was we've publicly said that we've been running MariaDB and MySQL for a long time. For various reasons, the workloads on some of our systems work very well on MariaDB. Also, we started using parallel replication, which was first available on MariaDB, and that actually worked really well. So you know that was fine, but so that was at 5.5, and at 5.5 basically MariaDB and MySQL, apart from some replication and parallel replication configuration, were pretty much the same. So the syntax was the same, and there were very few differences apart from the binaries and things like that. But of course, as 8.0, well, I've gone to 5.7, to 5.8, sorry, to 8.0. and MariaDB has gone through a few release changes and things, then the management of the two systems has diverged and required more effort to keep up on the different things that you need to do to be aware of. And so that eventually led us to decide to move some of the MariaDB systems, well, the MariaDB systems that we were running, to MySQL. That's quite a challenging process because with everything, we can't shut anything down, we can't stop. So you have to come up with a process to do that which works without taking downtime, and which allows you to do that. Some of these systems are also pretty large. We had some systems with 100 terabytes of data on the storage side, and so clearly, you know, migrating data, copying it over, or whatever you're going to do with it, it takes time, and you have to be very, very careful. And clearly, with large data sets like that, you need to be very careful that you don't corrupt, you don't make any mistakes, and everything works very well. So that process was quite time-consuming due to the size of the clusters that we were moving, not in the size of the data sets that we were moving the clusters. The clusters themselves were not that large. There were probably 10 or 20 servers per cluster, so not huge. But the data sets were quite large, and that took some time, took some work, and yeah. And there we decided it was simplest to move to MySQL 5.7 first. That seemed to be the easiest route to move through there. And eventually we completed that process to 5.7. Once on 5.7, the move to 5.8, we've got it automated, we know how it works. That was easy. And the guys were keen to get onto 8.0 to be the same as everybody else. So there was a talk by Mohammed and Pep yesterday discussing the migration process and how it went. If you're interested in that, I'd suggest you look up the slides when they become available online and find out the details involved there. Then the third set of things that complicate life moving to 8.0 are external applications and the vendors that don't understand databases. I can't name names, but I guess if you've had any applications that you've used that decide they want to use MySQL, sometimes they don't understand about. Well, we've been using HA forever, so we always think that's the way to make sure you've got, you know, you have replication, you have HA, and everything works, and it's really obvious. And we like row-based replication, we like primary keys, and with 8.0 we configured everything to require primary keys because the developers that forgot to add a primary key to a table and started inserting, and then started updating and deleting data and causing all sorts of havoc in replication, we didn't want that to happen again. And that setting was turned on like on day one when it was made available. But some of these application vendors said, we don't want primary keys, we don't think they're necessary. You know, why do you need a primary key? I mean, to be honest, some of the tables were small, but we didn't really want to work around that. And then we said, but you know, and we need you to do that, this, and then they say, but yeah, but why do you want that? Because of replication. We don't support replication. So you're saying, well, how do you handle high availability? Well, you just take a restore from backup. Right. So, I don't know. You know, so, and then other things, but the main, and then, you know, and then sometimes they say, we don't think we'll do that now. But of course, this was like 4 years ago when 8.0 came out. So we tried to get a few of these things done. Some of them had to put them off and things, but it's only taken until, I think, a few months ago that the last sort of external application vendor thing that we had eventually got convinced that, oh, they could now support MySQL 8.0, and they actually had primary keys. So we say, oh, good, now we can move you. So, of course, moving was no issue, of course, but getting the buy-in and getting the message over and the communication with people to get that done took a large amount of effort and things. The other interesting thing I've seen is, in some cases, some of the people that we've seen that were using MySQL, the older versions, the vendors have moved to Postgres. So I'm not quite sure why, but obviously they think it's better or whatever, but it's interesting to see that. And I wonder, I don't know, personally I've got no idea why that is. I guess they don't look at scale and things, so perhaps it's a different use case or whatever, or maybe the developers just think Postgres is either better or it's simpler to manage or whatever, I'm not sure. Or it's just in the cloud, I don't know. But it's interesting that a few systems that we used, the back end didn't support MySQL any further. But again, most things these days have been solved, so that's good. So again, really, you know, if you want to go to 8.0, basically from 5.7, you have to realize that 5.7 is really, really old. I mean, it was released in nearly 7 years ago, you know, so you shouldn't really be using it. There's a lot of new features in 8.0 security is better, it scales better, it handles things better. I mean, the Oracle guys can tell you, or the Percona guys can tell you why 8.0 is better than 5.7. You know, I think it clearly is, and it works really well. But you need to be aware of that. But then you need to communicate this with the people that are using your systems if you're still on 5.7 or if you're on 5.6 or whatever. And then obviously the advantage, one of the advantages with 8.0 is that you can actually get incremental changes while you're there. The only problem with that, of course, is that every minor upgrade is like a major upgrade, or it could be, and you have to check things more carefully. So that's actually not so nice, because you have to pay much more attention, even if generally there's no big difference from one minor version to another. But you have to pay a little bit more attention, because often because you can't go back. But the thing is there, don't lose focus, and basically you'll get onto 8.0 at the end if you want to. I did some quick summary of various things of the commits and things in between. This is between the minor versions of 8.0 from the GA release. So one of the things I saw is that I also had a quick check also from the 5.7 commits of the changes. Clearly 5.7 is just bug fixes, and 8.0 is bug fixes plus new features. So you see there's a huge number of commit changes, which are a lot larger compared to 5.7, which are just bug fixes. So I was on average about 1,500 commits compared to like 200 to 300. 118 different authors, something like that within Oracle, because all the commits are by authors in Oracle. And then like about references to, I think it was 180 bugs per internal release. So quite a lot of bugs that they were aware of for each of those releases. And one thing I did see in the last 3 or 4 releases, I think the number of authors and the number of commits went down a bit. Not quite sure why. I didn't look at the detail, because with that number of commits and things, unless you spend hours and days and things on that, it really isn't worthwhile. And then one odd thing which surprised me a little bit, Oracle say that they support lots of contributions from external people. I actually looked for like contributed by, and I actually looked, explicitly mentioned contributions, and there were like 12 from 12 different authors. Actually, the number was really small, which really surprised me, because your comments did lots, all these names and things. So I don't quite know what I've missed, or the way the commits go into the code is not done. I'm not quite sure. I mean, I'm just curious. It's just a curiosity more than anything.
Yeah, then because there are some people who commit also for 5.7, but as is merging into.
Oh, okay. Okay, so depending on the process, it may not. So the weird thing, I mean, it was just something I hadn't realised, because I hadn't actually realised previously. I'd assumed that external pull requests might actually just come into somebody else, not an Oracle employee. But clearly, all the merge requests are done by an Oracle employee, after doing whatever vetting of the patches and things like that. Yeah, sure, which is fair enough. But the weird thing is there are a tiny number of explicit contributed by references in all of these commits, which is a huge number. So it was 18 releases times 15, a large number of commits to effectively 12 authors. 3 would reference Facebook as a company, not as a personal contribution. So for some reason, I guess that's just the way you guys do that. And then there were happened to be 3 from Booking.com, which is great for us. But I mean, there were small patches that we provided, but not, more as a curiosity than anything else. Changes from our perspective in terms of automation, and this is within 8.0. So previously, we basically assumed that one version of 8.0, one version of 5.7 was pretty much the same as another version of 5.7. So you didn't really need to, once you configured it, you didn't need to change things very much. You might get one extra variable configuration setting or something like this. But clearly with 8.0, there's been a large number of changes and a large number of extra features, and you need to be aware of when the feature is available, when you can use it. So you really do need to be aware of the minor release, whether you can configure that setting in that minor release or not, and which setting you want to use. And of course, to actually deploy it and have it used by the users, say, for example, a rename column you can do now as an instant rename column, then you obviously need to check that not only the box that you're doing it on, but also all the boxes in the cluster, or they also happen to support that version. They need to be at least on the same version. So that was the one thing which we didn't have to worry about too much before, but now we need to be minor version aware for configuration and for management. And that was something which previously wasn't a real concern. And now it's something you do need to take into account. But generally, when we're upgrading things, we may upgrade a cluster, because some of our clusters are quite large in terms of the number of replicas we're running. You know, maybe a couple of hundred replicas. I think one cluster is still close to 1,000, which is, everyone says is weird, but we think it's like completely normal. But so we generally only do one minor version upgrade. So we're upgrading, for example, at the moment from 28 to 29. So we may have, 20% or 30% of the boxes running 80% running 28, and maybe 20% running 29. And basically, by sampling, we can see if any issues occur on 29. And once we see that it's working well, we can just push it out and complete the rollout. And that's staged on the different clusters we're running. So it takes period usually over a month. It's automated, so it just goes on. If something weird happens, we can go back. Yeah, sorry.
How long do you leave? So when for example, new release happens, 8.29.
Yeah.
So I understand that you were saying you move a percentage of your cluster, like 20% to the newest.
Yeah.
To test the waters, I guess. So how long do you use it? Do you leave it there to see if you move the remaining part?
So I think initially with the first, so usually what we do is, we've got several hundred clusters, I think 200 or 300 clusters at the moment. Some of them are quite large and things, but we basically choose some of the ones we don't really care, don't care about that. The not so important ones, the non-critical ones, shall we say. So we choose a couple of those that, if we have an issue, we can resolve it, it's not a big problem. And we just basically check they look okay for a few days. If we can't see any issues, then we just upgrade the master as well. And then, but doing leaf nodes are easy. Just throw them away if they break, and just spin up an older version. You just change the configuration, go back to the say 28, and it doesn't matter. So really, no problem at all.
How do you manage? Because now you cannot downgrade from.
Well, we just clone from another 28 box. So we use so it's not mentioned here, but we use native cloning really heavily. It's actually really, really efficient. I mean, clearly, if you've got storage side cloning, that also works much more. That's faster. But most of the systems we're running still on SSDs. Storage side cloning we can do as well, where we're using remote storage, but the performance on local storage often is much better. So we just do native cloning, and we've got the automations in place there. The box is gone. We just spin up another one. We throw that one away, and it will come back later in some other cluster or whatever. So it's not really a big issue, and we have enough redundancy that we can take quite a few systems to go down without it really causing any effect on the working from the application perspective.
You said that you'll let it sit for about a month, and then sample the.
So we don't explicitly sample them, but effectively what we do is we have them running. We just see if anyone complains. So the developers often occasionally come out and say, something's doing running really slowly, and it happens to be 8.0.29. Oh, okay, it must be, well, I'm making up the version, but it's this. Okay, maybe it's some what queries are you doing? Oh, they check the query, but is it the same? Does 28 perform the same? Okay, they notice with their metric, their own, the application side metrics, they detect that. They'll come back to us, they'll see that, or we might see a box that's getting overloaded for some reason. Why? Oh, it's running 29, not 28. Okay. Well, there's something different there. We can investigate. Is it the application doing? Because sometimes our applications, like I guess, a lot of other people's, the applications are changing a lot. So sometimes it can be they've just changed something. They've done something stupid, and it just happens to be picked up on a 29 box. Other boxes could be the same. But generally, you tend to notice, but this box has crashed, and it didn't crash before. It's doing something. So you tend to see a cycle of repeated instances that references, for example, a new version. And if you see that, then okay, you try and investigate it. If you report it, perhaps, and potentially roll back if that, roll back in the sense of throw away the version that's causing a problem. If you can still do that, which usually most cases we can, get it resolved or check if it's a configuration thing. We need to change something, resolve it, and then move forward again. But generally, that works very well because. Well, no, from in that perspective, it's not. We don't have automation checking for A/B testing of behavioural side. No, that's usually the devs pick up things pretty quickly. Clearly, maybe it's not ideal, but then the load on a specific server, where if you have a cluster of 500, is it's a sample. So even if that box is not going very well, the rest of the feet working fine. It really doesn't matter. So, it's not really a concern for us at the moment. Yes, we could do it better, I guess, but, a lot of things, everyone can do everything better if you have time and energy and resources and all these other things. But it works pretty well, and, in most cases, we've stopped a few times because of this, and also it may be a workload and only one one cluster with one application doing one particular type of thing, and everything else is quite fine. So everything else has gone up to 29. I'm not sure what the state of our fleet is at the moment, but it was about, I think we've got to about 10 or 15%. So we start off slowly because there's no need to rush it. But once we start to see that we've done 10 or 20% of the clusters, then we can basically just say let's go, and then we spin up things much more quickly, and that works very well.
So just real quick, so once the minor version comes out, you immediately think about starting to move to that version?
Yeah, I mean, yes. So I mean, we tend to do that pretty much immediately, and also we do it in production. But on replica, yeah. But let's be fair on replicas. So we don't. So as I say, in a lot of our clusters, we may have we may have 100 servers on there. So having like a small sample set, which is one box running 29, you can run it for a few days. If no one complains, it must be reasonably okay. Clearly, if it crashes on startup, then you don't do it. And also you can leave it. It doesn't because also one of the things is there are two things that are important to us. One is replication, and the other is client load. So the very first thing you need to check is it replicates cleanly. And while in theory you'd expect everything will always replicate cleanly from one version to another, as people that have done this before know, sometimes you get surprises you don't expect. So usually you don't, but sometimes you do. And so usually we just let it replicate for a couple of days. We see that replication's fine. We don't see any weird things because we do change grants, we do DDLs, we do OSCs, we do lots of. Just let it go through, no problem, fine. Then let some of the applications on it. Do they care? No, okay. And then a bit more. So it's just an incremental process, but it works very well, and the noise it generates usually is fine. We start on small systems and work through, and again, you can get caught by something really weird, but that's usually infrequent, and if you bump into something, it's usually quite easy just to stop it and to pull out those versions if necessary. But that happens very infrequently. And obviously the end result is that you end with your newest version out everywhere at 100%.
How long would it take us? Sorry, would it take you to have the whole fleet move to the latest version, like a month?
If we tend to make it last about a month and a half, we can probably do it in 2 or 3 days. But sometimes some of my colleagues that haven't been working with booking as long as I have find that a bit disconcerting. So because they like to do things a bit more slowly. So I mean, and also there's no rush. So let's be fair. I mean, the thing is also depends on what you're doing it for, because occasionally there are features. There's a new feature rename table. It's not necessarily for us a huge deal, but it's good because it means you have to rebuild the table and everything else. Sorry, rename column or something, or drop column. So before we have to do OSC, which will take ages. So if you actually want that out there because we want to drop lots of columns because we want to clean up a table, blah blah blah, and that's like instant and things, then maybe you actually want to push out 29 really quickly because that is really important. We want to put that on the cluster first, drop all the columns, then do something or whatever the magic is, and use that feature. So if we want the feature, or the clients use it from the application side, the SQL, that there's some new SQL functionality, they need some new geo thing or something like that, then clearly that will trigger you to do things more quickly. You pay attention to that cluster because you're doing it more aggressively, but generally that's, it depends on whether we want it as administrators, or if you like, the guys that manage the systems, or the developers want it because they want a feature that's come out that's interesting to them. But usually it's a month or so. And just because we've got a lot of servers and it takes it, but we can do it in a few days if we want to. I think, yeah, we can do it in a few days if we want to. So in terms of the new features and things, this is obviously a really really high level view of some of the changes. And these are within to 8.0, not 5.7 to 8.0. So there's a lot more granularity in privilege management. To some extent, from our perspective, I don't think it's desperately important, but I think it's good to have it. And I think it also probably, I imagine, for the cloud and things, that's useful to, I guess the bottom line is that's to ensure the DBAs can't see the data, because in the past no one cared, but now people do care. The instant DDL changes, I think they're actually really, really useful. In the past, as everyone knows, you've had to do like an online schema change, whether it's PT online schema change or Ghost or something like that. And on large tables, that means that you need to leave disk space for the biggest table that you've got, so plus the bin logs and all these other things. So you have all this free space in your file system, which you can't use because you have to have space for the biggest table. And then, of course, you're not paying attention and some guy decides to fill it up further, and then you come into like the hell of when you don't have space to rebuild the table, even though you want to delete data and all these other things. So the instant DDL changes are a really good thing from our perspective. It simplifies things a lot. It means the changes that we want to do are much quicker, and that's great. Compressed bin logs has been around obviously for quite a few versions in 8.0, but from our perspective was really, really important. It reduced disk space considerably. So I mean, we've often had, we usually have a retention of about 7 days of bin logs because it's just convenient. It covers a weekend, you know, it covers something, a couple of days you don't notice there's a problem, but you want something. And that's been really good. And on some systems with compressed bin logs, you can get down to like 20% of the usage you had previously. That's a huge improvement compared to what was done before.
How's the overhead of a compressed bin log?
Don't see it. I mean, I must admit I've not really measured it, but I think it's really small. Yeah. I mean, there are different like Z standard compression settings that you can use. We just use a standard one, but it's I think compared to everything else, it's negligible.
You're using the standard ones?
Yeah, I haven't changed it. I just turned it on and used it and loved it. And so that was really, really appreciated. It took a lot of time, like, to convince the guys at Oracle's that the bin logs are really useful. You know, we want them, but you know, they'd be nice if they're smaller. They obviously listened, and I'm sure other people are probably enjoying that. One of the interesting things is we've also bumped into users that can't read bin logs. Now, of course, in the past, the only thing that would read a bin log is MySQL. But these days, there are people like the Vitesse people that want to read bin logs, and there are lots of other import into other system people and all these other things. I've got no idea whether you can read compressed bin logs or not. It's irrelevant. But there are some systems which can't. And then they say, please turn off compressed bin logs. And you're saying, no, there's a reason we have compressed bin logs. They say, no, please turn them off because we can't read our data. We can't import it into some system. And that's filled up a few disks on some systems which are dedicated for that type of usage and things. So those systems are getting fixed and what have you, but of course it does show that some of these features are not completely obvious to some people, so it takes a long time for users. I mean, obviously that's like specialist usage, but that's a pain because having to turn off compressed bin logs and then have problems with disk space is really frustrating. Group replication, there have been quite a few changes in the 8.0. I think Fred was talking about that.
Do you think that like introducing a feature like that middle of 8.0, not going through a DMR, is also maybe?
But you could turn it. But it wasn't turned on by default, so it didn't matter.
What I mean is, like, when features are stacked in a DMR, like vendors can get used to them, but when they are dropped in a minor version like that, it just appears and.
Yeah. Well, this is something I'm going to say later. Yeah, because clearly the problem is it just appears. No one's aware of it. And right now, well, I'll talk about it later. But yeah, that's I think that's a problem because sometimes it's invisible, and if you know about it, it's great. But for a lot of people, it's invisible. And I'm sure that's something which complicates things. But yeah, I'll come back to that later. But so group replication. So group replication's got a few new things. There's this thing about async slaves can now recognize they're talking to a GR member, and they can like hop, if the GR member dies, they can hop to another GR member. That's actually quite nice. And also you can actually configure this yourself. I think there could possibly be further improvements in that direction, and that's something we'll probably see moving forward. But that's actually quite nice because that simplifies, you know, you don't want to have to, we can do a lot of things. We use Orchestrator. Orchestrator can handle that if a GR member dies. It can just hop over to another box. But clearly if the actual MySQL itself can handle it, less things for us to worry about. If it's integrated into the tool, then clearly it's better. And then, well, multi-factor authentication is interesting for some people. I mean, it's not a great use for us, but I can see that for other people it might be good. And then I think for importing data, one of the things that people have often said with importing data, you've got to, you know, you're importing data, but you don't actually care why you're importing it if it doesn't work properly. All you want is to get it onto the system as fast as possible. So turning off the redo logs, you know, parallel index creation is interesting, but you can't do that on a live system with replication. So it's great for initial setup of a system, but it's not great for day-to-day usage. But yeah, but there's some of the categories of features that we've seen. Also, it's a bit scary. There are a huge number of deprecated things. So they're deprecated, so most of them haven't gone, but they just say this is deprecated, and the list is like goes on forever. And I mean, one of the clear things is the change from master to source, from slave to replica, for example, the changes with UTF-8. Lots of developers think that UTF-8 is UTF-8, but UTF-8 in MySQL isn't. So it's good to like effectively now start to make it visible that UTF-8 is a 3-byte version called UTF-8 MB3. So some of the recent changes is making these things which were like obvious once you knew, obvious to everyone. So I think it's good. It also confuses some of the tooling that might not be aware and might think that it's checking table structures. So we have to manage our table structures and check whether they change and things. And if you upgrade and all of your systems say, well, all your tables have changed. Of course, nothing's changed, it's just the usage. So your tooling needs to be aware of some of these things. And I think there also are some non-standard uses of MySQL, of SQL, which have been more standardized, which is good. And several configuration settings, I think, with related to parallel replication have been like deprecated now because they don't make any sense with the current default settings and everything else, and some old mechanisms. But one thing which I do see that's missing is I don't know if I'm using any of these. I have no way of knowing. So there may be like 50 or 100 deprecated settings now in 8.0, and I spin up my MySQL instance, and if I start it up, I get some logging of some settings. So some settings I get told. But now, are my clients using deprecated settings? Are we using them? Am I using them a lot? Am I using them? I have no clue. No clue at all. So to talk to the guys at Oracle, it'd be really nice to instrument use of deprecated features, because we can't fix it if we don't know it's there. And if you come to a 9.0 or something like that at one point in time, it will break stuff, and we could have seen it earlier. So it would be nice if you can add some deprecation there. Stability. So 5.7 was quite simple. You got 5.7, you got the version, with the features you got, and that was it. And then from then on, there were bugs. Every system has bugs, and basically Oracle went through trying to fix as many bugs as it could, and so the version would get more stable. That was quite simple. I mean, it was pretty hard for it to get worse. I mean, I guess the devs could have been really silly, but generally it just got better. So basically, stability-wise, it's going to get better. That's fine. But so that's easy. But MySQL wasn't designed that way. So 8.0 was designed basically to evolve, which means that they might do bug fixes, but they're adding new features. So you get, a bit of a combination there, which can be interesting. And again, it's one of these like conflicts of interest. We want more features, which we've said we want. We said to Oracle we want more features. I'm sure other people want new features. Everyone can come up with a big long list like this, But then we don't want to wait very long for it, so we want them as soon as possible. So this was the compromise that came with 8.0 to get some stuff out there and incrementally improve later. So I think one of the consequence of that is that clearly that things could be, that there's a chance of getting more bugs and therefore more instability than you might have seen with 5.7 going over time. So we've seen a large number of changes compared to what we see in 5.7. Despite that, I think we've seen crashes in MySQL. I think if you don't see it, you're not stressing it enough. No, not a huge number, but you see some. I mean, and one of the things that we've seen not quite a bit from time to time under systems which are very busy is locking issues, deadlocks occasionally, but usually under high query load and with some special things. And we've seen a few bugs which we've later seen as related to 8.0 code. So we have seen a few bugs from 8.0 as well. And usually once they're reported, they will get fixed and things. And also if we see, as we were describing earlier, if you see that there's a problem with, say, a new version of 8.0 that comes out and you haven't rolled it out completely, you can go back. So it's not usually a big deal. And unless you've upgraded the master and all the replicas, then in general, if you have to, you can go back. Sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out what it is, pausing what you're doing, and then you continue later if you can get a bug fix or something like that. So some of the problems that we've seen. So group replication, we're moving to group replication. So bookings now, I think got, 20 or 30%, I guess, of our clusters are now running group replication instead of a single master. So we don't actually run group replication on its own. We run group replication with async replicas because GR doesn't provide enough servers to provide the service that we need for a cluster. We never have less than 9 servers in a cluster, basically. We need more than that. And they're across multiple AZs. So we often have sizes which are larger. So we basically have a GR cluster as for primary, if you like, and then async replicas behind that. That solves one of the problems that a lot of people have talked about, which is the split brain problems that JFs has given presentations on split brains in the past, at Percona Live, and it doesn't happen very often, but it can happen, and when it does, it's a mess. And GR basically can do that. But we've seen with GR, we've seen lockups changing membership. So I guess some people just spin up the cluster and don't touch it. It's there, it's fine, it's fantastic. But we have to do maintenance. We may need to upgrade the version of MySQL. We may need to take the server out, change the updated operating system. So we take members out, we put them back in again, we take them out, we put them back in again, different members in the cluster. And occasionally we've seen things lock up, and occasionally we've also seen write latency variability, which is a bit unexpected. We're still looking at that. But the lockups and things, most of those that we've seen have been resolved now. They were, I guess, small bugs and things. And I guess, as GR gets used more heavily by bigger users and things, I would imagine that, any remaining issues will probably get resolved. But so we've seen a few issues with group replication, and I guess that just depends on more people using it. Some of these bugs will appear, but they've been relatively minor. Native cloning has caused us quite a lot of issues. So I think the primary concern that we have, we really love native cloning. We use it as much as we can. It's really fast compared to if you're doing client-side cloning of data rather than storage side. It's really fast. It's faster than anything else. It's faster than doing, well, we used to copy with rsync in the past. We've tried extra backup. We've done lots of different things, and it's really, really quick. And it's, but you can only do the same version. So if you're upgrading, you can't use native cloning, which is really silly. And also the native cloning has some weird edge cases. Now, they assume that no one's using MySQL, which clearly no one should use MySQL. But sometimes our developers have been stupid enough, we've stopped it now, but to create tables with MySQL, and we didn't know, and then we started native cloning, and native cloning of MySQL tables only clones the structure. So you don't notice that everything, but it works. It works perfectly. Well, it seems to work perfectly. So, and then suddenly there's an outage. Boy, there's no data there. And you say, well, why not? And it doesn't tell you. It doesn't tell you it's doing that. So if it told me and it said, I can't do this, and you say, well, that's fine. But the fact it doesn't tell you. And then there's black hole tables. Of course, no one uses black hole tables. They're a bit weird, but we've used black hole tables for weird situations. They don't have any data, but they can be used as a sink that you just want to have a sink to keep things running. But you can't native clone black hole tables because it doesn't know what to do with them. But it's actually, so just copy the structure. So please support black hole tables, even though it sounds odd. Occasionally there are uses that you want some table that you don't need in a certain place, that you can just drop it, you can make it empty, and then you can insert data into it, nothing happens, but everything works and replicates normally for that specific thing. And if you need to clone another copy of that, you can copy it the same with an empty table, it's fine. But you can't do that at the moment. And then there's...
For the MySQL tables, you have the same surprise if you are using group replication.
Well, okay, I haven't noticed that yet because I've not been paying attention. But we stopped this now. Yeah, but we stopped this now because we actually now check, because we have automation when you create a table, but people put the definition in and everything else, and we validate it, but we didn't validate because we didn't think that people would do that. But then they're copying from some, it's some external, again, sometimes an external application, copy paste, this is the definition, put it into the table, blah, blah, blah. And you don't see it, and you don't realize, and then because we're using native cloning, it's fine. Anyway, so they're silly things. And then one strange issue which we bumped into, we've previously been using normal compression, so page compression with the compressed settings in MySQL. But some of the developers decided to use transparent page compression, so that's where you use sparse files. And that runs really well, and they compressed a lot of tables and things, and then we tried to native clone a system from one system to another, and it got stuck. And nothing actually complained, but it just got stuck. And we tried again, and it got stuck. So okay, let's do an rsync clone. Let's rsync the file system from one to the other. Oh, it's got sparse files in. Okay. So rsync doesn't work, if you do it at the file system level. Native cloning got stuck, and then someone said to me, so we oh, that's weird. Then someone tried it with ext4, and it works perfectly. And you go, okay, fine. So we bumped into this extra backup. Let's use extra backup as well. And extra backup got stuck. And people are going, oh, this is weird. So clearly these sparse files and things on XFS do weird things. So we bumped into that, and it only happens when the apparent size of your data set matches the file system size, even though the compressed size is much smaller. But once it gets to the file system size, then at that point it all goes south, and it goes south really badly. Luckily, extra backup's been fixed. Luckily, MySQL's been fixed, but that caused us a bit of confusion and understanding what the problem was and trying to figure out how to resolve that, and it was completely unexpected, but took quite a while to solve it, or to get it solved. And yeah, if you use ext4, it's fine. So why the difference? I don't know. Yeah, anyway, so yeah, and then there's a plugin thing. So native cloning requires you to use the same plugins, and if they don't, it doesn't work. That's also a pain. Then one other thing related to grants. We didn't have a huge number of grants because we like to have like one application, one user, one database, nice and simple. Now we've had to change things into be a bit more structured and things. And if you push out lots of grant changes, they can generate global locking. Those global locks can lock up the system. So they've caused us some issues. They've been resolved in most of the cases. We've seen that now. But again, so some of the grants, and also if you have a large number of grants, they can cause problems as well. Pushing the grants out, because each statement is considered a transaction, it gets synced, and you want to do a bulk change of thousands of grants before setting up a setter environment in your development environment, and you can't do it quickly. So having a bulk mechanism there would be really good. Other things, so yeah, most incidents that we've seen basically is specific to workloads. So yeah, that's just the way it is. Sometimes you do something a weird way and it causes problems. Most of the feature many feature requests were triggered from those incidents. So we've tried to resolve them one way or the other. But basically 8.0's worked fine. We've not had any big problems with it. It's been stable. Upgrades have been smooth and everything else. Let's just go back to some things. So upgrading's easy. You just change the binary and you upgrade and you're done. That's great, fantastic. The only problem is you can't go back. So going back is a bit of a problem because the on-disk format is configured so that MySQL checks the on-disk format and it says, oh, this was a higher version, I will not work. And that's actually a bit of a pain because if ever you have a problem and you want to go back, you can't. The only way to sort that out is to do a logical dump of your system, which is slow, inconvenient, and everything else. We've bumped into this once we just upgraded the master, replication broke, and basically the whole cluster went down. Well, it didn't go down, but we couldn't serve the traffic and things properly, and had to do a logical dump of the system and then load it into an older version of MySQL. So that's something which I think it would be good to make that featureable as a feature that you can switch on for one version maybe, or maybe two only, so that you can just check that the new version without the new feature works, then enable it, and then don't go back. That would be fine, and that would be something that would be good to look forward to in the future, to do it that way. It clearly. Yes. Oh, yeah. So the issue was caused by a very weird edge case of virtual for a particular case with virtual columns with a non-primary key because an application vendor's codes, and so it was a complicated thing. But yeah. But the thing is, it happened, and you don't want things like that to happen and catch you out when you least expect it. So I think just moving forward, because I'm sort of running over time a bit. So basically, I think what will be good is getting a table of features. Because it's hard to see what features you get in 8.0 as it's increasing, please provide a table of features so we can query it. We can see when it came in, if it's a feature that can only be turned on or not, and a link to information about the feature. Then we can see what features are there. Then people can actually detect if there are more features and find out information about them. Just a table, it can be something really simple, but do that, and then you can configure turn the feature on if you want to. If it can be turned off as well, fine. And if eventually you don't want to allow it to be turned off, that's also fine. And then expose that. So because 8.0 has been a little bit more of a challenge in some ways because you have to pay a lot more attention to it, I do think that moving to 9.0, A9.0, whatever 9.0 might be a good idea. There's loads of deprecated things. It'd be good just to throw them away. It'd be good to start from a clean new base. I believe maybe Oracle have some ideas of new things they'd like to do but didn't want to push into 8.0. So maybe it would be a good time after 4 years to consider starting from scratch, start clean, and maybe just do a similar upgrade process as with 8.0. Incrementally as well, maybe, but with some extra bigger changes first, But please have something that you can see the features so you can turn them on, and you can go back at least for one or two things like that. And thank you for listening.